Welcome to Transforming Work with Sophie Wade, exploring the future of work. Find out what's going on, disruptions, evolutions, opportunities, challenges, and interventions in our multi-generational distributed organizations. With a new tech and talent focus, discover what you need to know to stay upskilled and relevant and ensure your business keeps its competitive edge. Sophie investigates the promise and reality of the future of work now and as we look ahead. She interviews people who are changing work experiences and practices and shares how we can each transition smoothly and successfully to effective and more productive new ways of working.
Hi, this episode is about intentional reinvention for modern work, transforming work for your organization to meet current and future business and employee needs based on data, research, surveys, analysis, experiments, iterations, and refinements. By now we know this is not a time for cookie-cutter solutions. Hybrid and remote models are nuanced and need customization for each organization. There are principles to found strategies upon, such as incorporating flexibility that works with the digitized dynamism of the future of work and also gives employees more autonomy. Also, learning, including ongoing employees' feedback about their different needs, working individually and in teams. To match market dynamics and up-level for distributed, digitalized business operations, what should be prioritized? What mindset shifts are necessary? How is your culture best manifested and nurtured? How are employees' connections best formed and fostered? What employee skills need to be acquired and behaviors established, emphasizing which work methods and supported by what tools? These are just some of the questions every company needs to be asking and addressing to compete in today's business world. So I'm delighted to be talking with Allison Vendt. At Dropbox, Allison is a senior director and global head of Virtual First, People PMO, and People Analytics. Allison's expertise spans strategy, operational effectiveness, change management, M&A, and designing and scaling high-impact employee experiences, which includes designing and continuing to evolve Dropbox's approach to the future of work, Virtual First. Hi, Allison. How are you?
Hi, Sophie. I'm good. How are you?
Very well, thank you. We start at the beginning, and you did American Studies at college. What was of particular interest about that for you?
Yeah, so American Studies, it was a multidisciplinary major at the school I went to, Notre Dame. And I think that alone kind of intrigued me because I could combine lots of different focus areas within my major. But probably like the real driver behind that at the time was that I wanted to consider going to law school. I will say that dream was crushed when I took a law class and I realized I don't know if this is for me. That said, the major itself was an incredibly interesting one. I combined history and government, and it really was more writing intensive, critical thinking type of major, and took classes like across, again, art history, U.S. history. I remember even taking a class around the role of television in American history, for example, which was really fascinating. But yeah, I think it was the ability to kind of make it my own and customize it to what I really wanted to learn about at that point, which I think as an undergraduate was something that was really important.
Was possibly the history of media what took you into media planning? Or what was the segue there in your first job?
Yeah, I think honestly, like a lot of recent college graduates, I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do from a career perspective. I had this vague notion around I want to work in business and I want to do something creative. And I was looking into a lot of different kinds of fields. And I wish I could actually say that it was that media class that inspired me. But I think ultimately, I thought advertising sounded really interesting and started applying for roles, and ended up in a media planning role for about 6 years after college, which I loved. I worked with a lot of really interesting clients like Coca-Cola and Marriott. I kind of even knew when I started in that, like, oh, this isn't my forever career, but it was something that definitely kept me engaged and I learned a lot from in those 6 years.
You changed career to be working at Temple University. Obviously, you had decided that media planning wasn't the career for you. What then generated the decision to find something that you thought was more aligned with what you wanted to do?
I think for me, I started to realize maybe when I was year 4, year 5 into that career, that what I really wanted to be doing was to have more of an impact in my day to day and working
Hmm.
with people. I had always been really interested in working in education and
Hmm.
shifting into that type of role. And so I went to graduate school at NYU in education and
Okay.
specifically really focused on working with student athletes. I actually had been a student athlete when I was in college. I was a swimmer. And for
Oh,
me, yeah, college athletics was, I think, is a really amazing entry point for a lot of
and
people.
swimming is brutal, though. I mean, you were swimming every single day at 5 o'clock in the morning or something.
Oh,
Isn't that
yes.
true? Right? Oof.
Absolutely. Have a lot of very interesting memories from those days. Certainly taught a lot, but yes, and especially in Indiana, biking to the
Okay.
pool at about 5 o'clock in the morning,
Yeah.
so in the snow.
So feeling extraordinary empathy for these student athletes, that's where you go
Yes.
to help them get up at 5 in the morning or what?
Maybe to a certain extent, but no,
Hmm.
really working with student athletes from an academic perspective. So everything from kind of academic coaching and counseling, helping people figure out what type of major might I be interested in, or
Okay.
I need some extra support in this particular area, or I'm trying to explore what I
Got it.
might want to do after college. So I worked officially as an academic advisor, but what that meant was, working with individual students,
Hmm.
running different programs, ran orientation programs, tutoring
Interesting.
programs, student development programs,
Right.
things like that.
And then you moved to Stanford and you're again focused on student athletes, but then taking it up a level and doing some more advising and research. What was the progression there for you?
Yes, for me, working at Stanford was just an incredible experience. And I
Hmm.
moved into a leadership role there, leading our advising office for student athletes. And it was a wonderful job where I felt like I was having a lot of impact. But I think living in the Bay Area and close to Silicon Valley, right, you kind of get curious about, oh,
Hmm.
what would it be like to shift into tech? What would this
Okay.
look like? And so
Mm.
I got approached about a role at the Graduate School of Business at Stanford, working in their
Okay.
executive education department.
Mm.
And I kind of took a leap of faith moving into that role, leaving the world of working with student athletes and undergraduate students behind. I thought maybe I'll come back to it, but I was intrigued
Right.
and I actually saw it really as sort of maybe this half step into kind of exploring a career in L&OD, learning
Hmm.
and organizational development within tech. And then when I actually started working within that space, that's really what I was doing. So I was really running programs on campus for entrepreneurs. We did programs overseas as well for professionals that came to the Graduate School of Business for week-long programs taught by the business school faculty. And I worked with a lot of L&D folks within companies. And I think for
Okay.
me, we're kind of on the vendor side. And
Right.
that got me even more intrigued. And I was like, oh, I think I'm on the right path.
I do want to ask because I know how much corporations like to hire top athletes because of their discipline and sports ethics, their training ethic. So I'm curious as to how you found the transition going from dealing with student athletes then to dealing with workplace athletes, employees who are working in Silicon Valley with an extraordinary intensity as well and trying to maintain some discipline in how they're approaching their work or not.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. Not one I've been asked before. I mean, certainly the personal experience I had as an athlete, I think, has absolutely shaped me as a
Mm,
professional. And I think working closely with student athletes, you also see just this kind of full breadth of what people put into their lives and what they're
mm,
interested in, and that sort of notion of like bringing my whole person, right, like my
right.
whole self. And I think working with Stanford student athletes are incredibly high achieving, incredibly,
I'm sure.
goal oriented. And I
Hmm.
certainly have found that in, my 6 years working at Dropbox, we've got a similarly like very motivated kind
Hmm.
of employee workforce that is very high achieving and cares about producing great results. So in a lot of ways, it's interesting. I haven't been
Hmm.
asked that before, but I see a lot of parallels actually between those two. So
Right. So that lures you into the enterprise environment, obviously with there being a lot of overlap because you are dealing with people from those environments. So then you actually do take the leap and go to Dropbox in L&D. this is where you had found your place, that this was what you wanted to be focusing on. And I'd love to hear some of that experience, because the next role you took on was as head of employee and career development, was
Mm-hmm.
right before the pandemic. What was the environment at Dropbox? What you felt about the culture? How was it run operationally with the same vision as a long-term Dropbox user? What was it like, because it's so important as to then how it changes?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I was nervous to start my first job in
Okay.
tech, right? Like you certainly hear a lot of story,
Yeah.
a lot of friends and former colleagues who had shifted into tech and, coming from a university environment that I had been
Mm.
really comfortable in for so long, then I was like, oh, I'm going back into the corporate world. Like, what will it feel
Mm-hmm.
like? And I will tell you that, my first day at Dropbox, I was just like, oh, like it felt like home, honestly, like the culture at
Okay.
Dropbox, like
Yeah.
people talk about this a lot, and I've been there for 6 years. And I mean, I really love the people and the
Mm-hmm.
culture. And that was something that stood out to me literally on day one. I was like, wow, this place is incredible with just really smart people, but also just really kind and passionate people as well. And
Mm.
so it was something where, like, any kind of fear that I had about, oh my gosh, I'm moving back into, corporate America and
Right.
into the tech space, was just immediately kind of abated by how warm and welcoming I think the Dropbox culture was. And
Wonderful.
yeah, I mean, when I started, our learning and development team was kind of in a
Mm-hmm.
transition period. We had the previous like L&D leader had left. We had a
Mm-hmm.
very small and scrappy team, and I started really as a program manager and did a lot of different
Okay.
things. I did some work in leadership development and employee development. I kind of raised my hand and said, I'm open to doing everything.
Okay.
Yeah, I just really wanted to learn. And it was a great time to do that because there was a lot of open space to kind of
Sure.
experiment and work in different areas. And
Mm-hmm.
so after about 6 or 8 months, we had a wonderful L&D leader in place and began to build out the team. And that's when I kind of shifted into this role and doing employee and career development. So really focusing, yeah, in the development of our employees, like who were more on the individual contributor side, right? So more about what are the specific skill sets that employees want to develop, employees want to move into becoming a manager, but then also career development too.
Let's just stop on that for a second, because 2019, I've already been talking about the fact that organizations are flatter, careers are nonlinear by default because you can't
Hmm.
go incrementally up lots of rungs of the ladder anymore.
Hmm.
Talent mobility is not easy. The recent LinkedIn data, which came out, I think, in January or February, said that only a third of companies actually have internal talent marketplaces and ability to move people around easily. So, with the need for upskilling, which was already understood, how is that then being viewed at Dropbox? I imagine it is relatively flat in comparison to much older organizations. What did career development look like at that point?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good question. At that point, I mean, and I think we've evolved our approach certainly over the
Mm-hmm.
last couple of years. But at that point, I think we were really focused too on what can all of our employees do to really own their careers,
Mm,
and take again that sort of like ownership mindset around careers. And
sure.
what does that look like?
Mm-hmm.
And so at the time, I think we were really focused on rolling out a new personal growth plan for all of our employees and managers to use. We also at the time we experimented with a lot of things like doing stretch assignments
Mm-hmm.
and bungees, very much kind of in line with what you were saying about moving laterally at different
Mm-hmm.
points to get a
Right.
real breadth of experience. And so those are some of the things that we experimented with, I think, during that
Mm,
year. Now we're I think continuing to really focus in areas like mentorship and more about how do we continue to like develop skills and shift into
mm-hmm.
this really skills based kind of like organization. So
Mm-hmm.
that's something I know that the team is really really focused on. But for us it was at that time was really focused on again people being able to take ownership over their careers.
Mm-hmm.
What does that do? How do we
Right.
give not only our employees but also our managers like the skills
Mm-hmm.
that they need to help support within the constraints, right, of the
Mm,
organization, but also really really focusing on things like that 70% of the meaningful, it
Right.
comes from actual experience too. And so
Yeah.
we really tried to lean into that, I think.
It is necessary now for each employee to own their career. But that transition is a huge shift for large organizations.
Mm-hmm.
So then the pandemic happens.
Mm-hmm.
You shift relatively quickly by May 2020 to a different role. What did you see in terms of how your customers were needing to shift and what Dropbox needed to do as an organization, and then the evolving realization that the company was having during that time?
Yeah, I mean, so I think, what I think was interesting about this for me personally is, right, we've been talking a little bit about my career journey. What
Mm-hmm.
was really interesting was like when the pandemic hit, I was obviously still working in my particular role, like leading
Mm-hmm.
employee and career development. We were certainly doing a lot of work to ensure our employees felt set up to work successfully within, a remote environment because we were very in office culture before that. But
Right.
at the
Okay.
same time, the person who had led our people strategy and operations and people analytics team had moved on from Dropbox. And I was like, I think I'm going to throw my hat in the ring for this. I think for
Okay.
me, I'd really love the L&D space so much.
Yep.
But what I really loved about learning and development was sort of thinking about those organizational goals and outcomes that we're,
Mm-hmm.
trying to achieve and translating that into what are the behaviors. And so,
Sure.
so I think it was that, and that strategy and operations work was something that I was really passionate about, and
Mm.
was lucky enough to be able to get that role. And my first strategic project was Virtual First, what became Virtual First, I should say, because I will say my predecessor in this role and a cross-functional team within
Mm-hmm.
Dropbox was already exploring remote work and
Okay.
what that would look like at Dropbox. We know we really wanted to think about how do we continue to expand our talent pools and our
Sure.
talent
Mm-hmm.
markets beyond where we are now. So that work had kind of kicked off, and I
Okay.
had mentioned this a little. The culture at Dropbox is really incredible, but I
Mm-hmm.
will say, in addition to that, our culture at Dropbox pre-pandemic was very, very office-centric culture.
Okay.
Yeah, so about 97% of our employees were like aligned to an office location. Only 3% of our employees were remote.
In May 2020, feeling like you have an in-office culture, great, you had some thoughts and ideas that had already been developed about what more remote working could feel like and what that might operationally require. With this new role, strategy, operations, and analytics, obviously, I imagine you start trying to gather data. What were the other things that were top of mind at that moment, particularly because Dropbox had such a strong culture and you're now not in the office anymore?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think all of those things, I think were, very, very top of mind to us. I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
think that the thing that really stood out to us, this is not going to, ways of working are not going to go back to kind of where they were. It felt like
Mm-hmm.
a very, very significant transformation point.
Even at that moment, even so early on?
I think so. I think,
I do too.
yes.
But it sounds like you were primed for it, right?
Certainly. And I think, we also, just knowing the mission of our company, right, is to
Mm,
design a more enlightened way of working. It felt like
mm,
we really had to, really kind of take this opportunity to really reinvent what modern work looked like, for
mm,
us at Dropbox, and really kind of, take advantage of, this opportunity to really kind of reinvent what we were doing. And so, I think for us, we really tried to approach it, I think, in a very, very thoughtful way. A
mm-hmm.
lot of companies and other organizations, I think, were coming out very quickly and indicating what they were going to do for their,
Yeah.
working model. And we did take some time with it. We really wanted to kind of do our due diligence around,
Mm-hmm.
everything. And I mentioned we'd already kind of kicked off some work around this, but we dove a ton deeper, right? We
Okay.
looked at our own internal survey data. We
Mm-hmm.
did a lot of research with other companies that were operating really successful from a remote standpoint. We looked
Mm-hmm.
at companies that had remote policies and then reversed them, and why did they reverse them? We really wanted to
Mm,
understand that too. We looked at a lot of industry trends. And then I think from there, right, that was where we really came up with kind of a set of guiding principles that now, 4 years later, continue to guide the work. So that it was really important for us to kind of take that time and be really, really intentional
Sure.
about what we were doing to have a really solid design to kind of kick us off.
So 2 points about that. One, I think it's very important what virtual first means to you, because I do know that that means different things to different people. Secondly, when did you actually announce it?
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious also, I guess. Third point is, as you're coming up with and ready to announce a new policy, which is a huge strategic shift, what kind of interactions or testing with employees and going back and forth and getting more feedback and iterating to ensure that this was the right move?
Yeah, I mean, so at a high level, right, what virtual first kind of means is that we work remotely for like, that's kind of our primary orientation of work.
Okay.
But we do prioritize human connection. And I think, again, that was something that one of our guiding principles was something that was really important. We really believe there's just no replacement for that face-to-face, in-person connection. And so it means that we gather as a team on a quarterly basis in person for a couple days, essentially a quarter. But beyond that too, right, when we were saying we work primarily remotely, we had to really kind of reinvent again, how we work, meaning we had to adopt things like an asynchronous by default mindset. We, looked at a number of like mindset shifts, right, that we would have to make in order to do that async by default, like moving from kind of syncs all day to async by default was something that was really important to us. So we set up like frameworks for success. We use core collaboration hours, which are like 4-hour time blocks per region that we allocate for synchronous collaboration, for example.
How did you work out that you needed to have this mindset shift about async collaboration? Because I do find that there are many companies that aren't as aware of what a significant shift. Obviously, you're going fully remote, which is a huge change for a company that was fully in office.
Yeah.
At the same time, I think the how of work and how you're designing work and how you're thinking about it, there's some shifts in there that I would love a bit more granularity.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was something that came out really clearly from the research that we were doing. All the research that we had done on like effective distributed work principles was leading with this asynchronous by default mindset that we had to get really, really good at what this meant, right? And that's been everything for us, from like, how do we really reinvent, like what's the role of meetings, right? And so we try to really think about meetings being for debate, decision making, and discussion, right? So it's not about status updates, for example, which you can easily do asynchronously. But that's also meant we've really had to upskill everyone, including myself, on asynchronous, communication, getting really, really good at writing. It can be hard. It's with a lot of intention. But yeah, I think that was really us looking at lessons learned from other companies, looking at research and best practices out there about how to work effectively and with distributed teams. And so that's been something that I think really motivated us there.
There are many companies that have said our culture was in office, just as you have done. You have these very important in-person connection times 4 times a year. How do you live, model, reinforce the culture all the rest of the year?
Yeah, I mean, and I think it's something that we have spent a lot of time kind of thinking through and developing. I mean, if I go back to our initial development of our virtual first strategy, right? It was an HR-led project to start, but what we did was really, as we started getting buy-in from our executive team, we were, again, very clear, we need to reinvent everything, including looking at our culture. And so we had a number of work streams. We had about 100-person Tiger team, but we had one work stream that was dedicated to culture and community, and like, what would it look like in this new way of working? There's a number of different things that we have iterated on over time. I think at first, right, we were really remote only for a good chunk of time because of the ongoing, effects of the pandemic. we had planned to open and start doing offsites and in-person gatherings, and then had to close down again. So it wasn't really until 2022 that we kind of introduced that in-person work. And I think something we've found through our research too is like those touch points are something that have been incredibly important for that sort of sustenance, throughout when people are working virtually. So that team connection is something that's really, really important. But I think through that culture and community work stream, we really tried to think about what were the different cultural tethers and touch points that really connect people to organizations and drive a sense of belonging. And I think, that's for us meant investing in everything from managers, who play an incredibly important role working in a distributed way, right? In terms of being that connection point to the rest of the organization. Investing in employee resource groups and our ERG, or otherwise known as ERGs, right, to continue to be cultural touch points there. We also, in 2022, launched what we call our Dropbox Neighborhoods program, which was something that we saw with our workforce got incredibly distributed, right? So we went from being very, like in the United States, for example, being very heavily located in San Francisco, Seattle, Austin, and New York, to then seeing a critical mass of employees in places like Denver and Atlanta and Portland, Oregon. And so we were like, this could be a really interesting and creative way to kind of think about how do we build community with folks locally, where you might not be on the same team, but what you share in common is that you work for Dropbox, right? And so that's been something where we'll do people will gather to co-work together, for example, in those places. They'll watch an all hands together. We might do a manager training. We might do ERG, programming, a social impact, volunteer day within those neighborhoods as well. We also give some funding for employees to be able to plan their own events if they want to do a book club and gather folks together in Chicago or go to a baseball game, right? So that might be more socially kind of focused. And we try to enable that to, again, really think about empowering our employees around that. We also do we launched a mentoring program too, because again, I think it was, really about building out those weak tie kind of connections that we know that can struggle a little bit when you're working in a distributed way. A lot of people, I think, feel very connected to their direct teams, but maybe not as much to the other people that in a virtual first world, when you're in office, you might bump into them getting food or in line, at getting coffee or something like that. So we've really tried to think about not just taking what we did and just moving it into but really reinventing and thinking about what are the core elements of our culture that we really love.
Were some of those programmatical elements, but individually focused, part of the self-serve aspects that I've heard you mention in the past, which were allowing people to choose the type of elements that were going to help them nurture the community or connect with others across Dropbox?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was something, I think when we, again, were kind of developing our strategy initially, that, we thought about from a mindset perspective. When you're working in a distributed way, you're not sitting next to every single person that you're working with. This idea that you can self-serve is something that's really important, whether it's finding information to do your job, whether it's, I have, I'll use in-person gatherings as an example. We've tried to create a lot of self-serve materials for folks to leverage. We call it offsite in a box, for example. So I can go and I can pull things from this and customize it to what I need. We've done a lot of transformation, like I mentioned, around the knowledge management piece. And I think it's about it, and so much about Virtual First too is about empowerment, like individual empowerment. Part of kind of working with an async by default mindset is that folks can then work within a nonlinear workday, kind of structure. So it's a really empowering, I think, thing for each individual employee to really own their schedule, own what they're doing. And that self-serve mentality kind of, it's practical, given how distributed our team is, but it's also kind of also continuing to empower all of our employees to, be able to do what they need to work effectively, to have their teams work effectively as well.
That speaks to a lot of individual awareness about how I work best, where I work best, how do you train the managers, and how do you help them help each one of their team members be more aware, be more self-observant about how I work best, so each person can optimize and then the team can optimize together?
Yeah, I mean, so I think we've just invested a lot in overall manager effectiveness. Again, I
Okay.
think part of it was also really understanding as a first step, what is the role of the manager in this new way of working? And that's,
Yeah.
again, where I think we really could see, again, from existing research, also doing a lot of our own research, that again, that role of the manager is just so critical it's critical in any workplace, but certainly in a distributed environment in terms of, you are that, again, that connection point. So we've invested a lot in manager training. It's kind of overhauled all of our leadership development training, making sure too that folks understand, like, what are the ways that, I can successfully develop my team, communicate with my team? How can I conduct team operations in this way? So it's been, again, about just really partnering closely with our learning and development team, which is my former
Right.
team,
Yeah.
very closely on kind of making sure that all of our kind of virtual first principles, the research that we're learning, the insights that we have are getting embedded into our manager training. And we do have a virtual first toolkit as well that we, have open source, so anyone can check that out online. But we use those toolkit practices with our managers as well. And we communicate like regularly with our teams too. We have like a virtual first Slack channel, for example, where we have most of our
Okay.
employees are in there, and every couple of weeks we'll post new tips and tricks, things to try. We always are piloting things and kind of try to engage managers there. So it's been, again, it's kind of embedded into all aspects of our training. And we just continue to iterate on it too, based on what we're learning and what we're seeing.
So I have to ask the question, because I'm sure any listener who is at a company which has a hybrid model, which is most of them, why didn't you choose to go hybrid? That would seem to be more obvious. Most people do know now that that is harder than virtual first or fully in office, but it is where most people have ended up. And for most companies, that is a relevant choice for their workforce. What was behind the definitive decision, not hybrid, but virtual first? And then I imagine you may have lost some people.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really great question, and something that we spent a lot of time. So if I go back to kind of like the spring of 2020, we did present options everywhere from a fully remote to fully back in office, and a variety of options in between, including hybrid. And I think for us, we really deliberately elected not to adopt a hybrid model. And I think that was really based on the research that, we had done. And because, ultimately we felt like leveraging sort of a hybrid model was going to create two really different experiences for employees. And again, something that we saw as a really common pitfall of why why organizations had reverse policies, or what had been some of the issues with that. So whether that was around inclusion, access to information to do your job successfully, career
Right.
development, all of those aspects. So for us, it was really important to not go in that direction. And again, but like a fully remote option was also not going to make sense for us, because that human connection element was something that was so incredibly important.
Right.
And I do think that, I obviously follow very closely what, is happening in this space and what other companies are doing. And I do think hybrid models can be very, very challenging to do operationally as well. And so I think for us, it's been really important to have, a consistent, like a central kind of like framework that we're all operating around, that can be
Sure.
customized, to specific team needs as suitable, but we all kind of align around that. And again, and did some people, feel like, oh, I'm not sure if virtual first is going to be for me? Absolutely. And
Sure.
we did see, some folks opt out of the experience. But I think what's been really interesting is we have seen a lot of people come back.
Oh, really? Oh,
Yeah, which has
nice.
been kind of fun. But
Great.
also, I think that, like, And it was hard. And I think, a question you had asked earlier too was just sort of like, how did we kind of pilot and test? And that was also something I think, we came out right from the gate with, we were very transparent about our guiding principles, one of which was we're taking a learning mindset with this, which is to say, we built this like we build our products. We're going to build, we're going to learn, we're going to iterate. We're going to do that over and over and over again. And that means we're going to have a very open, feedback loop with our employees. Right. And so we got a lot of critical feedback, I think at the beginning, or just, I'm not sure. But one thing that was, I think, really powerful for all of us, and that it just kind of gave us like, I don't know, the conviction that we were on the right track too, was a lot of people who were like, I don't know if this is for me. They were like, I really think this is the right thing for our company. It feels progressive. And so we were like, okay, we believe we're on the right track with this, but we also know that we have to make sure that we're being incredibly thoughtful about change management. It was a major organizational transformation for us. And so part of what we really built into, and again, kind of going back to that learning mindset, is a lot of pilots and experimentation. And something that we did first, for example, was pilot some of these core practices like asynchronous by default and core collaboration hours with different teams, got the results, learned, continued to iterate on it. And I think that's something that we've continued to do as well. Like, hey, we heard your feedback and here's what we are changing as a result of that. And keep giving us feedback, because we will, so we're all kind of building it together, which is kind of exciting.
And recognizing that if something isn't perfect yet, we're working on it.
Exactly.
And I'm partially responsible for that too. Onboarding in Virtual First. How did you approach that? And iterating as you go, what does it look like?
Yeah. So I think, again, this was another area that we had to completely overhaul. We had actually a really incredible onboarding program prior to the pandemic hitting that had just been redesigned and launched actually in January, I think, of 2020 was when it had launched. And I think this is another area that we've iterated on over time. But I think that something we've tried to be really thoughtful about are things like, how do we make sure that we are embodying our virtual first principles within onboarding as well? So what are the moments when we want to make sure we're bringing this onboarding class together synchronously, right? To really, and like, what are the sessions that we want to make sure people are learning versus like, what are the things that people can do on their own that are self-paced? We use a communication tool, for example, that helps nudge folks along with different, so we're not, throwing a bunch of activities and tasks at people at the same time, but kind of parsing it out. So more in the moment types of learning is something that we've done. We do a lot of sessions on how to make virtual first kind of work for you, having people really understand things like, what are core collaboration hours? What does it mean to like set my calendar and design my calendar? Can I really decline meetings that are like outside of core collaboration? What does that look like? All those kinds of frameworks for success. But also, again, because our Dropbox culture is so important, like we just really want to make sure that folks like feel supported and connected right to the culture from the get-go. And so have like an onboarding program too that goes beyond, that first week. It continues into 30, 60, 90 days as well. We try to create some virtual onboarding communities as well. So again, we continue to iterate on this. So we just made some changes to our onboarding program, for example, last year, and I'm sure we will this year as well, just from what we continue to learn. So that's kind of how we approach it now.
Fantastic. So now you've got all that sorted and you're primed and ready to go. Now we're in the future of work. And there's this new skills focus, and we've got AI, which has come along. Just love to get a few thoughts about that. I'm just wondering from the HR perspective, because skills is a huge people issue, AI skills is a huge people issue, and how jobs functions are changing and just how you're approaching that. You obviously have an effective approach to redesigning how you're working in terms of location, and now taking that to the next level.
Yeah. I mean, I think, similar to, we're in a huge period of transformation right now. And things are just changing so rapidly. I mean, I think something that we're really excited about at Dropbox is just the potential with AI and the potential that
Mm-hmm.
it has to make work easier. And I think a lot of folks are already feeling that with a lot of
Mm-hmm.
the AI tools that have already come out. It's enabling a lot more productivity and ideally taking away like more friction from
Mm-hmm.
working,
Mm-hmm.
enabling more focus time, all things that I think are really important to us and like our virtual
Yeah.
first way of working and something that
Sure.
we've really tried to optimize for as well.
Mm-hmm.
But I think from an HR perspective, we've been really focused on how do we ensure all of our Dropbox employees, can work successfully within, as we continue to evolve AI. So we've
Mm-hmm.
had a lot of kind of focus training and programming right
Right.
around
Okay.
AI, learning more about the role that it's playing. I mean, and we're doing a lot of work like from a product perspective ourselves in
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
AI. We
Sure.
are doing a lot of experimentation with,
Mm-hmm.
tools like Dash, for example, which is a new AI tool that we have that's an enterprise search tool, for
Mm.
example. And so we're
Okay.
excited about the role that will play too in
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
advancing modern work. But so I mean, I think it's about really spending that time kind of like focusing on what are the skill sets and things. But I think from like a virtual first perspective, one thing I will say is I think it has enormous possibility in terms of
Mm.
like when I talked about the intentionality behind asynchronous communication and
Mm.
collaboration, like AI tools have like an enormous role to play, I think, in that and saving time and helping us be more efficient in those types of things as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it's certainly something that, again, we're excited about kind of marrying skill sets that,
Mm-hmm.
behaviors that we're trying to enable and then the tools that can do that, because that's something
Sure.
that we've really found that behaviors and the tools obviously need to go
Mm.
hand in hand. So there's just a lot of exciting possibility, I think, there. It's ultimately, I think these are also, again, with the more efficiency and productivity that AI tools are providing to us,
Mm-hmm.
too, it's, again, something that will help all of us get more kind of that focus time, that flow
Mm.
time as well, that is like so important to continuing to drive impact.
Mm-hmm.
So we have like kind of a whole dedicated work stream, like within our
Mm.
people team in partnering on kind of advancing how folks are, using AI tools, leveraging
Sure.
AI tools, and what that means for all of us as employees. So we're kind of work in hand with AI, and that AI is really how do we kind of
Lovely.
work in partnership with it? Yeah.
Love that. So my last question is, because of the virtual first, which I think is so interesting that you took that approach early on during the pandemic and have not only stuck with it, but been learning and iterating. For a company that has a hybrid model, knowing where you are, knowing why you are there, what would be just a few thoughts that you'd have for them? Would it be to consider going virtual first? Or would it be to say, okay, you got a hybrid, here's some ways to optimize it? I don't know. What are your thoughts there?
I do think, again, every organization is going to be
Mm-hmm.
different. Lots of companies have different kinds of ways of working, and people are
Mm-hmm.
working with physical materials that need to be in person, right? So, like,
Mm-hmm.
I
Sure.
think there's no like one size fits all. That said,
Mm-hmm.
I firmly believe in the efficacy of our model,
Right.
and I actually do think it kind of is that. And I think I would challenge folks too to think about like, is there a central kind of framework that you can all kind of align around that does allow for some element of customization and flexibility, right,
Mm-hmm.
within different pockets of the organization. Because I actually do, and something that we found too, right, is folks are so incredibly productive when they are working virtually, and but you still need that in-person element and
Mm-hmm.
that in-person kind of connection, and that is
Right.
incredibly core. I mean, I would challenge, and again, I think a lot of times people will look at it and be like, oh, well, that makes sense for maybe a smaller organization
Mm.
or an earlier
Right.
stage company. And I would challenge people to say, like, you can actually make a pretty dramatic change. It's
Right.
going to be difficult, it's going to be challenging, but it is worth it. And I think, one thing that we hear a lot from our employees is like, I love working in this way and I don't really want to go and work in a different way. And I think it's really
Mm.
progressive. And so I would challenge other organizations to maybe
Right.
even try it with some corner of the,
Mm.
of their organization, just to see if something like this could potentially work. Because again, we really think it has kind of the best of both worlds and is, something that enables both that productivity and effectiveness for teams combined with, you still get that human connection, but then you have a lot of autonomy and ownership. And you're in charge of kind of your day and your schedule. And there's something I think really powerful that we've seen around that. So, I would challenge people to, think about this approach based on what we've seen with our employees. Like, folks are feeling very happy and productive in working in this way. And I'd love to see more companies and teams adopting this, because I certainly work in this way, and I'm like, I don't know that I ever want to work in in another way like this again. I'm excited to see how we continue to evolve it too.
Right. Yes. Happy and productive. That is a very powerful and very strong combination. So thank you, Allison. Really, really appreciate you sharing your journey as well as the journey and the challenges, the huge shifts and experimentation, exploration that Dropbox has been under and where it is now, and the huge success story. Because there are companies that started fully remote and continue fully remote, but this is one of the few large organizations which was very much in office and is now virtual first. So I really, really appreciate you sharing everything and all the insights that you've given us. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a wonderful conversation.
Thanks again so much to Allison Vendt, Senior Director, Global Head of Virtual First, People PMO and People Analytics at Dropbox. You can follow Allison on LinkedIn and find out more about Dropbox and the virtual first approach to modern work at dropbox.com. You can also follow Dropbox on LinkedIn, Instagram, and X at Dropbox. Immediate action tip. Consider virtual first over hybrid. Whatever the size of your organization, you can adapt the core framework appropriately. Try a virtual first approach with one unit of your company to see if it could work. The benefits of happy, productive employees outweigh the challenges. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend and like it. You can also write a quick review wherever you listen. For regular video updates, posts, curated useful articles, research, and information, follow me on LinkedIn and sign up for my Work in Progress newsletter there. Thanks for listening. Until next time.